This legislative year was pretty confusing as far as how things shook out in Albany. The budget was delayed, then a deal was made, then it wasn't, then it finally passed. Some bills got done, others didn't, all in an election year. You'd be excused for not being up to date. So we have our veteran Albany reporter to talk about what went down and why it matters to you on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake, dedicated to strengthening visitors' connections to the natural world. More at wildcenter.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, June 8th. First up, more than 20 people were recently detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the Adirondacks. The arrests came during two separate operations in Saranac Lake and Lake Placid. As David Escobar reports, local immigration advocates say the detentions are part of a broader shift in how ICE is operating in the region.
The first arrests happened in late May. ICE agents detained 14 people in a parking lot on Muir Lake Drive in Lake Placid, including a dozen people working on a nearby roofing project. Then, last week, ICE detained 7 people who worked at an Indian restaurant in Lake Placid. They were stopped while driving through Saranac Lake. That's according to North Country Immigrant Allies, a local advocacy organization. Keela Gourmet coordinates the group. She says the recent detentions are heightening fear among local immigrants, especially in the Latino community.
Folks who are at risk, meaning they have a slightly darker skin color, they may not have citizenship, feel especially at risk, and like they're just having to watch out every second of their lives. Who's watching them? Who's following them? How can they stay as safe as possible?
Gourmet says some immigrants in the Adirondacks aren't U.S. citizens, but have pending asylum cases or temporary protected status that allows them to legally work while their immigration cases move forward. ICE's presence in the community has grown since the Trump administration began its immigration crackdown. In the past, Gourmet says agents might visit local businesses once or twice a year to collect paperwork. Now, she says, advocates are seeing officers spend more time in the region, conducting surveillance before making arrests.
What started as a tiny trickle of maybe they came in for one little day or two, extend to like they were present, people felt watched from the parking lots outside their buildings, outside their work, outside their living space, and then a person would get taken.
In a statement, ICE said several of the roofers arrested in Lake Placid had prior criminal charges. The agency did not release details about the immigration status of other detainees or whether they're still in custody. David Escobar, North Country Public Radio.
The 2026 New York State legislative session is in the books. It wrapped up last week in Albany. Over the past 5 months, lawmakers passed a slew of new laws, including a $268 billion budget that came in weeks past deadline. The measures include a crackdown on car insurance rates and utility rebate checks. The budget also softens the state's climate change laws and limits local police from cooperating with federal immigration authorities. The New York Public News Network's Albany reporter Jimmy Vielkind joined Catherine Wheeler live on Northern Light this morning to help make sense of it all. And he started with that immigration bill.
Lawmakers voted to ban formal 287G agreements, which are between U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and local police departments or sheriff's offices. The budget also would prohibit local jail cells from being used for immigration detention. That's something that has happened recently in Clinton County for many years, and the sheriff is reviewing that policy. The new state law would also restrict how all law enforcement agencies can wear masks, and it gives individuals the right to sue if they were harmed by immigration enforcement or their property was damaged. You know, the budget also rolled back some of New York's landmark climate law after a months-long pressure campaign from Governor Hochul. She argued that meeting the state's emission-cutting mandates would increase costs for residents. Legislators, environmental groups said that that would be harmful and that there was no evidence that the law, which hasn't been fully implemented, was raising costs. So the legislation that was adopted in the budget eliminates a requirement that New York cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. And that gets replaced with a new target, a 60% cut by 2040. But unlike the current law, that 2040 target isn't going to be a mandate. There will be some exceptions. Business groups really cheered this move.
Yeah, that's a pretty wide-ranging things covered in the budget. Is there anything you're surprised made it in or that lawmakers left out?
I was surprised that these utility rebate checks made it into the budget. It's not something that Governor Hochul proposed. It's something that legislators put on the table. And it cost about $1 billion. Now, we said it was a $268 billion budget, so $1 billion doesn't sound like quite a bit. But choosing to put that money out the door in checks, which state officials estimate will go to more than 8 million New Yorkers, represents a lot of spending that lawmakers didn't do, items that they didn't spend that money on. The biggest one to me is some kind of a program to help hundreds of thousands of people whose state-backed health insurance is expiring this month. Extending that and extending their coverage might have cost around $700 million, though the exact estimate's not clear. So the rebate checks did get in, but health insurance did not.
Let's turn beyond the budget. What are some of the big things that lawmakers approved this year?
Well, after the budget, and there was really only 1 week of lawmaking after the budget, the two biggest things have to do with redistricting and data centers. So state legislators approved a 1-year pause on the construction of large data centers. They cited concerns about the usage of water, power. Labor groups and some developers are concerned by this. They say it's going to make it difficult to invest. But this is actually really big. If Governor Hochul signs this, New York would be the first state to do such a moratorium. And then the other major debate had to do with redistricting. That's normally a once-a-decade process by which we draw new lines for Congress and the state legislature after the release of a U.S. Census. But the Democrats who control state government passed a constitutional amendment that will let them do it earlier in time for the 2028 elections. And the amendment also lifts a ban on partisan gerrymandering that voters approved in 2014. So all of this is in response to other states that have been gerrymandering their lines. If this is finally adopted, New York could enter the national redistricting wars, which will have big implications over which political party controls Congress.
What's the likelihood of Governor Hochul signing those into law?
Well, she doesn't have anything to do with the redistricting, even though she has said she supports this kind of process. A constitutional amendment needs to be approved again next year by lawmakers. And if it gets approved, then it goes before voters on the November ballot in 2027. And I expect there's going to be a whole lot of campaigning about it. Republicans unanimously voted against it. They say it's a power grab. They've been calling Democrats hypocritical, saying that Democrats said that they believed in independent redistricting, but now they're rolling all that back. But Democrats say the world has changed and that they're going to make the case that this amendment is worth supporting because Donald Trump is urging Republican-controlled states to draw lines that favor the GOP. Now, the data center moratorium's no real slam dunk either. Hochul's expressed her concerns. She said that she's concerned about how data centers are using power and perhaps raising utility rates for people nearby. But she stopped far short of saying she would sign this particular bill. Now, what often happens is that she will negotiate kind of a side deal, which is called a chapter amendment, with lawmakers and then either agree to sign it if they pass the side deal later on in the year. Lawmakers don't like that, but it seems like that might be what has to happen here to get this signed into law or have it potentially vetoed. And then, there were also no real major actions on prison policy. I know we've talked about that. We've talked about how there is still a heightened level of violence in state prisons, that there are still crises of staffing. The National Guard is still stationed in correctional facilities across the state. And so the budget did include $500 million to continue that deployment, but lawmakers didn't make any policy changes that people on all sides have differing ideas of what will make it to run the prisons. So that includes Republican-backed proposals, which would make it easier to put people into solitary confinement, or ideas championed by progressive Democrats that would make it easier for people to get parole and therefore reduce the number of prisoners and perhaps allow for some relief on that staffing crisis.
That's our New York Public News Network Albany reporter Jimmy Vielkind speaking this morning on Northern Light with Catherine Wheeler. We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Christopher Watts of Canton and Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.